Breakfast with Bob.
Welcome, everybody, back to Breakfast with Bob. My name is Bob Babbitt. We're brought to you by the PTO, the Pro Triathletes Organization, by Amp Human, VeloFix Normatec Form Goggles, UCAN, and our Challenged Athletes Foundation. Right before COVID hit, we sent out 3,921 grants, totaling $5.9 million to keep challenged athletes in the game of life through sport. And a gentleman who has been a big supporter of CAF and has an amazing story joins us, Derek Fitzgerald, one of the co-founders of the Endurance Zone TV. How you doing, Derek?
I'm doing fine, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, it's fascinating looking at your background. So where'd you grow up?
Pennsylvania, around Philadelphia.
Sports? What sports were you playing?
Soccer.
You were a soccer guy?
I was a soccer guy, yeah.
All through high school and into college?
Actually, I went to state champs with my school in 10th grade. We moved districts, and it went to basically the worst soccer program in the league, and I was like, I'll join the band. So I joined the band 11th and 12th grade years. But yeah, I played soccer all that time.
So, but out of college, your lifestyle wasn't the healthiest, right? You got to a point where, you're about 200 pounds, a little soft.
Oh, yeah, very soft. I was plump.
And when did you realize that there's a point where you're just not fit, and there's a point where there's a problem? When did you realize that there was something more than that going on?
Well, you know what? I figured everybody said that at a certain point, stuff starts falling off of you as you get older. And I just thought that I took such bad care of myself that when I turned 30, that's what I thought was happening. And ultimately, I found out that I had a tumor that they found in my stomach, in my intestines.
And it took them a while, right, to find that?
It took them 8 months of, searching.
Yeah.
One shadow on one scan they saw, and they said, "Hey, listen, because I was having bleeding problems, and it was all kind of digestional tract stuff, and they said, hey, before we send you on your way with all this bleeding, and it's just one of those weird things, we'd like to cut you open. We'd like to look inside." And I said, yeah, sure, whatever. And they cut me open. And the next thing you know, they're like, yeah, we found something we weren't expecting. It was basically, I was so fat that they didn't realize that my stomach was distended from a tumor the size of a grapefruit.
So because you were overweight, they didn't see a tumor the size of a grapefruit? Correct. Oh my God.
And I had enough layers on top of the tumor that they were pushing on it. They're like, nothing hurt something? No, so yeah.
And it was lymphoma?
Yeah, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
And so you're dealing with chemo for how long with that?
I went through 5 months of chemo.
Okay.
And they said that, that I would go through chemo until the cancer was gone or my body could no longer withstand it. And thankfully, after 5 months, they said, you're in remission. Congratulations.
Good to go.
Good to go.
So at that point, when they tell you you're good to go, did you started changing things and going, I want to get fit now because this is sort of a wake-up call, or not really?
Oh, no, absolutely. I was like, you know what? That was enough of a wake-up call for me. I hopped on an elliptical machine, and I hadn't done any exercising in years at that point. And I mean, after the surgery, after they took out the tumor, they'd sliced me from just below my rib cage to below my belt. So they had severed my core. I had to learn to walk again through that. So getting back on an elliptical, it was a little bit of a challenge, but I knew right away that I was having a hard time breathing. At first, I just thought it was, being out of shape.
Right. And when did they realize that, okay, maybe all this chemo didn't do a nice job on Derek's heart?
3 months after I was declared in remission.
And so now, how did they frame that in terms of, because do they know that ahead of time that, hey, if we do chemo for this period of time, we could cause other damage?
Yeah, basically, for my chemo, they hung everything from a bag into an IV. But there was one drug that they couldn't do that. And they said, hey, listen, this drug can be toxic to your heart. And so because of that, we're going to have this nurse sit next to you with her thumb on the plunger of a needle over half an hour, and she's going to just keep pressing this slowly into your system. And if it feels weird, then just tell us to stop, and we'll stop immediately. But you're going through chemo; everything feels weird.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but there's like they said, there's a 2% risk that if this gets out of the vein and into the rest of your bloodstream, it could damage your heart. But quite honestly, we know more about hearts than we do about cancer. So if we damage your heart, we damage your heart. We'll deal with it. We'll cross that bridge if we have to.
So when you're dealing with heart issue, how long was it before you knew, okay, this is, I'm sleeping all day long. I can't do anything.
Yeah, I was back at work, and I was, there was a particular hill that I used to walk between my parking lot and my office building. I'd walk that hill all the time. It was not a big deal. I get halfway up the hill, about 3 months after I was declared in remission, I'm back at work. And all of a sudden I have this dizzy spell where I had to sit down, and the world started spinning, and my hands got heavy, and my chin got heavy. It was like I got knocked out. And I had to collect myself, and it was like 30 seconds of a spell that I had to kind of ride through. And I was like, well, that's odd. Maybe this is just leftover remnants from chemo. But I went in to have myself checked out. First, they thought it was pneumonia. Then they thought it was pleurisy, and then finally, after trip after trip after trip of like overnight ER stays, this doctor comes to my bedside. I'd never seen him before. And he does a whole bunch of tests on me. And what I didn't recognize at the time were they were cardiac stress tests and echocardiograms and things like that. And finally, he comes and sits by my bedside, and he said, "Derek, I know you've had a rough year with cancer and chemotherapy. I'm afraid I've got some more bad news. You're in heart failure. And you are," basically, he told me that I was a hair's breadth away from needing a heart transplant, but that hopefully through diet, medication, and exercise, that I was no longer going to live the life that I had once hoped. But that through diet and medication and exercise, they could at least make me not uncomfortable for the rest of the time I had left.
And what were they telling you in terms of the amount of time you had left?
It was tough to tell. They basically said that if I were, a fraction worse, if my heart function was a fraction worse, I would have been on the heart transplant waiting list that night. And you never know at that point, because it's a waiting process. There's more people on the list than there are organs available, and you just have to hope that you get your lucky number called.
So how long was it into this process where you got put on the list?
I went through 7 years in progressively worsening symptoms. So those initial symptoms of dizziness that were 30 seconds long went to basically to the point where I was awake an hour a day. I was coughing so hard that I thought my spine was going to snap in two. I could no longer lay down to sleep because my heart wasn't strong enough to pump the fluids out of my lungs. So I had to be propped up in bed. I couldn't walk more than 5 steps over the course of this 7 years. And, everything that I thought I was and thought that I enjoyed doing was slowly taken away from me until I was propped up in a bed, struggling to breathe, and no longer able to work, no longer able to do anything. And I was just riding it out, hoping that something would change. Either I would get a lot better or I would get a lot worse. But every day I would go to bed and wonder if I was going to wake up the next morning, and how long could a body withstand that kind of punishment. And every day my eyes open, and like, all right, I'm still here. I got another shot.
Was your family close by in terms of mom and dad to be with you, or what type of support did you have around you?
Well, I was in another marriage at the time, and so my wife was there with me, and she was taking care of me. My mom and dad lived 15 minutes down the road, so I had plenty of support. But by the end there, most of the time, and especially when I was admitted for my transplant, I was asleep, and I was even when I was awake, I was out of it. You don't have that much blood flowing to your brain.
Yeah.
so people would hold my hand while I was laying in bed unconscious, and they would cry, and and that was pretty much my existence.
So when did you find out that they found a heart for you?
I was wheeled into the hospital. They rushed in an ambulance to the hospital on December 26th, 2010. And then on January 3rd, 2011, the transplant coordinator comes walking into the room, and she's crying. And she said, "Derek, we think we found your heart. There's been an accident. The transplant team is in a helicopter right now flying out to the scene to check it out. And they're going to make sure that what they think is compatible is truly compatible. And if it is, then they'll have that heart back here tonight. And we'll open you up, but you'll be under. We'll open you up, and we'll have the heart and you opened up, and your chest cavity opened up. And at that point is when we make the final determination. If it doesn't look like it's going to fit, then we'll sew you back up, and we'll wait for the next opportunity."
Which might never come.
Which might never come. And so I looked at this transplant coordinator and I said, "I've got to take this, don't I?" And she was crying. She said, "Yeah, you have to take this."
So when you are knocked out and go in there, you don't know if you're going to come out. You don't know if you're going to be alive the next morning or if this is it.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Exactly.
when they, obviously the heart worked, could you tell a difference right away? Like, oh my God, I have so much energy.
Oh, well, one, when you don't have any blood flowing through your system, you're just gray. Your whole skin tone is gray.
Right, yeah.
And so everybody noticed, before I even woke up, that I was flush with color. And so I woke up, I was still intubated, and I have all these machines surrounding my bed, and I'm hooked up to all these IVs, and the pumping and the clicking and the beeping, all those IV things that keep beeping every time. And above all those things, I heard a thud, this thud, and I couldn't tell where the thud was coming from. And then I realized it was the fact that I was laying on a pillow, and I could hear the thud of my pulse, of the heart rate, of my heartbeat pulsing through my head, because it was just like a rocket just pounding away. And I had forgotten what that felt like. And
that was the first time you'd felt that forever.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It had been 7 years.
Wow. So now you get out of the hospital, and you've got this new lease on life. Now, did you know who the person was, or the family was? They didn't want to connect.
Yeah. And I respect that. I mean,
totally. I get it.
Yeah. I know that they're a hero to me.
No question.
And so, no, I've written 2 letters to them since. One, to thank them for saving my life. I wrote them six months to the day. They tell you, that the hospital will tell you, listen, don't write right away, because you're on so many meds that you're just jacked up on juice, right, basically, and you're not thinking clearly. So I waited 6 months. And on 6 months to the day after my transplant, I thanked them for my life in a letter. And I know it got to them through intermediaries.
Right.
And then the second letter I wrote to them was to thank them for keeping me alive long enough to become a dad. And I sent them the Ironman World Championship medal after I did Kona. There's only one like that, right? I'm the only cancer surviving heart transplant to finish Kona. Right. So I'm supposed to be anonymous, but I don't think everyone realized that when I sent them the medal, that there's only one of those out there like it. And
they would know.
They would know. And I owe them so much more than that. But the fact that I now have a 6-year-old daughter, and for the longest time, I didn't know why I survived all those things that I did. Heart disease and cancer are the number 1 and 2 killers in the United States. And I survived for 7 years. Well, more than that, 12 years through all of that stuff. And so I finally found out when she was born, my daughter was born, I knew why I had survived.
What's fascinating to me is really in this person's last moment on earth, he saved your life.
Yeah, he or she.
He or she, yeah. Yeah, you don't know. God, that's amazing. So I saw your first 5K 33 minutes, 56 seconds. Probably your favorite 5K of all time.
Absolutely. Yep.
How long after you got your heart?
I was transplanted in
January, right?
January 3rd, and that year, 8 months later, September 11th, I did my first 5K, and it was a Travis Manion 5K Heroes Run. So they had dudes there in full army fatigues, gas masks, weight vests, and there I was like, I'm just happy to be outside.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did all of this change the way you live your life?
Well, I live it from a place of gratitude now. I mean, I was not active prior to cancer. I mean, I would have to go back to high school to think about the last time I took care of my body. And now everything I do is I see myself as a custodian of a small portion of someone else's legacy. And in doing that, it has served me. So, I mean, I consider me no longer a me, but a we, because I wouldn't be here without this other person's heart, and they wouldn't be here without my body carrying them around. And so for me, I'm a team, and it's my job to, I'm the chassis, I'm the vehicle, but this other person is the engine, and we just don't function without the other.
What I love is you go, you do your 5K, and then 2 months later run a half marathon, and then 2012 you do your marathon, and just all these athletic achievements. Was that just sort of validating to you that I'm back? This shows that I went to the dark spot, and now everything else is gravy.
Well, for me, it was like kicking the tires. What can we do? And what's possible? And so the transplant for me didn't bring me back to where I was before. It brought me to a place I've never been before. I've never been this healthy. I've never been this athletic. So for me, it's just, as you said, it's gravy. I'm in bonus time.
Yeah. And
so all the things that I used to do, I was a workaholic, and I never saw the sunlight. And, now I'm a dad. Now I'm a husband yet again. And I love being outdoors. I love experiencing life and not just focusing on the daily grind of, earning a paycheck.
How did you find the sport of triathlon, and why did that appeal to you so much?
Well, the funny thing is that I owned a business when I was going through cancer and heart failure and the transplant. 3 days after my transplant, my company sent me a movie prop replica of Ironman's heart, the arc reactor, in a little glass case. And I said, Ironman, isn't that some kind of race or something? I said, maybe, wouldn't that be something if one day I could do like a 5K maybe?
Yeah.
And then I looked up online, and I found this other guy who was a heart transplant cancer survivor by the name of Kyle Garlett. And he had attempted Kona a couple times. And I was like, wow, maybe I could be like that guy. And so every time I went out there and I started, I started very humble beginnings. I started trying to lift my head an inch off of a pillow all of January of 2011. That's where I started. And then it started with an army crawl across my bedroom.
Yeah.
So every time I got to a new level, I was like, all right, so what else can we do? So ultimately, I read Kyle's book, and I was like, man, this guy set a bar and he threw down a gauntlet. I'm like, hell yeah, I'll pick that up. Let's do this.
And so you do Ironman Lake Placid in 2013. And I'm guessing when you're doing that, you're thinking, if I can do this, I can go to the Big Daddy and go to Kona.
Well, it was, I didn't even believe that I would finish, even within the last 5K of the marathon. I had some friends running around me. Sorry, Ironman, they weren't helping me, but they were there cheering me on.
Right.
And they're like, you're going to do it. You're going to finish this thing. I was like, no. No one's ever done this. I'm not going to believe this until I cross that finish line. So I wasn't thinking Kona then. But 4 months later, I did Ironman Arizona. And that was a completely different race. And I finished that. And I did that with, we went attempting with 5 heart transplant recipients to try and do Ironman Arizona in 2013. But myself and one other transplant finished. And even then I wasn't thinking Kona, but Kona is a gift, you know, for a back of the pack age grouper like myself. Unless you qualify, it's such a long shot. I didn't entertain the thought. And then it was presented to me and I was like, oh yeah, let's do this.
So 5 years after the transplant, the symptoms come back.
Yeah.
And you had to be scared to death.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was frightening. I started going into heart failure. And I started having trouble breathing. And I thought, man, you know, one side of me said, well, at least I got a chance to experience what life can really be like.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side of me said, man, I saw all this. I was given a glimpse of it, and now it's being taken away. But I try to remain thankful. And so that was ultimately my perspective. You know, it was one of the lowest points in my life. But it was also the same point that I met the woman I'm married to now. And so I was in heart failure. They were going to either put me on the transplant waiting list for a second heart, or a third actually. And so, and I said, well, hold on, before we do that, let's just ride this out. Give me another week. Let me see what happens. And that week turned into a month, turned into 3 months. And ultimately I went back in for a follow-up and they said, we can't explain it. You're out of heart failure.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And 2 months later I did Ironman Wisconsin.
And they have no idea what the heck was going on. Just
no.
Your heart was doing a little, we think we might reject him. Well, we'll keep him for a while.
Yeah. You know what? I got to thank this person in my chest, because
yeah,
they've done so right by me. More than I have ever, asked for or deserved.
So Derek, talk a little bit about the creation of Endurance Zone TV, because to be honest, when Fireman Rob sent me the deck on it, I'm looking at this going, this is like the early deck for ESPN. They're trying to do everything here. They better have a lot of money and a lot of staff to make this thing happen. Talk a little bit about how that came about and just the whole launch.
Yeah, the crazy thing about it was that Rob and Todd Jennings, they co-founded Endurance Zone TV. They reached out to me, or Rob reached out to me to do his podcast. And so I was on his podcast as an interview. And I just happened to see a note on their social media saying, is there anybody who knows anything about triathlon and marketing? And I was like, yeah, Rob, I have a marketing agency that I run. I obviously know a little bit about triathlon. How can I help? And he's like, well, we have this thing that we're going to do in about a week with Meredith Kessler and Marinda Carfrey called Real Moms of Triathlon. So you think you could help us market this? And it's going to be a live show, and we know nothing about technology. We know enough to do this interview. And I can't say technology. Todd owns a tech company, but they knew nothing about video per se.
Right.
And so do you think you could help out? And so a week later, we launched Real Moms of Triathlon.
Yep.
And 5.5 hour broadcast. We had all these guests. We had live footage cut with pre-recorded content that we had put together. We gave over 10 grand to CAF. $11,000
to CAF, yeah.
Yeah, so we were so proud about that, and we thought, well, you know what? There's all this content out there. There are so many stories in the endurance community.
No question.
And they're so inspiring. And for myself personally, my goal is to help people get off their rear ends after significant health challenges, just to show them what life can be like. And this, to me, this spoke to that. This spoke about inspiration and motivation and get off your ass and get moving. And to have, people like like Rinny and Meredith and Rob and Todd and Will Smith and
Mm-hmm.
you know, talking to people like yourself, I was like, man, this is all heading in the right direction. So cut to August 10th, you know, from May to August 10th was when we launched Endurance Zone TV as a platform.
Right.
And so we have 10 to 12 shows now currently in production, interview shows. We have reality series that are being put together. We have documentaries that we're putting together. The content is coming out of the woodwork, and you know, there's not a lot of money behind it, but it's a passion project, and
Right.
we're passionate about the endurance sports in general, because it's not just about triathlon. It's about all endurance sports.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about, like, when you go to a Netflix and you see the individual swim lanes, that would be comedy or drama or action or sci-fi. Those have all been replaced on Endurance Zone TV with, you know, long distance swimming, or, you know, marathons or adventure racing or OCR. And when you have so many different sport disciplines, when so many people, there isn't a lot of cross pollination, where, you know, the mountain bikers don't know a lot about, you know, the roadies, or don't want to associate with each other. We're like, let's bring everybody under one big tent and expose
Yep.
everyone to everything. And maybe we can make something that's greater than the sum of its parts.
And the thing is, what I found with competitor over the years was that when you have that welcome mat and people can sort of choose what they want, they have a little bit of a salad bar, they find the sport they want, they find the athletes they identify with, and you just sort of make magic.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I definitely don't think we would have launched or gotten as far as we have if all of us weren't long distance, you know, triathletes.
Oh, no question. Yeah.
We are pulling some crazy hours, and we're just a little bit nutty to begin with. So, you know, but we love doing it. And again, if you love what you're doing, it's not work anyway.
Well, and the storytelling, as somebody who is a story in himself, when you see these stories of Roderick and Rudy and some of our challenge athletes, you're somebody who, you know, a good story when you see one because you've lived it.
Oh, and that's the thing. I mean, I get so inspired listening to these stories, and there's just, you know, you cannot sit on the sofa idly by and watch life go by when you watch these stories. And it is motivating, it is inspiring. And, you know, it's inspired me to really take a hard look at myself and go, well, what have I done lately? You know, when I talk to Roderick or Rudy or Siri, or you name it.
I love it. Hey, thanks so much, Derek, for taking time and chatting. Your story is unbelievable. I love what you guys are doing with Endurance Zone TV. It's
Thanks,
going to
Bob.
be a great journey, and I love working with you on it.
Well, thank you so much. So thankful to have you involved. Thanks, man.
All right, Derek Fitzgerald has been our guest again. Breakfast with Bob. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Bye.